I was eyeing this guitar. It's going. Um, Hello. Is this a good volume? Cool. Uh, Welcome everybody. My name's Eric. Me and Andre, raise your hand. Me and Andre organize the All Things Web group. For those of you who haven't been to any of our events, we do a monthly event, and we just try to hop around to different tech companies around the Bay Area. Sometimes we get talks from those companies, sometimes from the community, usually a mix of both. Yeah, if you like all things or anything's web, you should definitely come to more of our meetups. You can join our Discord as well. If you go to allthingsweb.dev, there's a link to our Discord, upcoming events, etc. We try to have this like monthly talk. We're doing hackathons, trying to figure out how to do a mini conf. Right, Andre? Podcast, Netflix special. All right. Anybody else like just kind of like tired in between like Thanksgiving and the end of the year? Just like having a hard time getting out of bed. Well, have an exciting night. I'd like to thank both. Convex. Cool, cool. Thank you for having us. Convex. Okay. Who likes working on crappy backends? I think LinkedIn over there. Just kidding. Can we cut that? If you don't like working on crappy backends, should try out Convex. They're what one-stop shop for all the things you need for a full stack app. You just worry about your front end. Okay. Uh, uh, I'm joining the sales team tomorrow. And then just kidding. And Clerk, who's from Clerk here? Who likes working on legacy crappy auth systems? Oh, see, we got another hand back there. Uh, if you like not having to worry about auth, user management, uh, sign up forms, SSO, all these things, try Clerk. Uh, Anything else? Do you guys? Okay. You both of you guys have like free starter plans, I think, right? Yeah. So get going. Cool. Um, right on. Think that's it for pre-speakers stuff. Andre's the brains of the operation back there. So tonight we have two great talks. Both are focused on local first applications. One web app from Ian, I believe. Um, Ian, I've pretty much forgotten everything else you said besides the AI town. If anyone's not seen the AI town thing, it's pretty cool. It's like a year ago, something like that. Where it's just like a bunch of AIs walking around in a village. It's like a with perspective, like RPG. Like, yeah, it's pretty cool. They're creating memories and talking to each other and plotting to maximize paperclip production or something. Uh, um, and then the second talk we'll have from Simon back there, uh, director of engineering at Ario. Heyario.com. Been doing React Native for longer than anyone that hadn't worked at Meta pre 2015 has been working on React Native. It was 2014 you were working on it. Went open source 2015. Worked at a bunch of different places, startups, YC stuff. Latest thing is Ario. He'll be talking about React Native, local first development, and yeah, cool. Let's go. And if anyone wants to jam later, I think we can jam. We're looking for a drummer, bassist. All right. Ian, you want to take it away?
Dun, dun, dun. All right, I'm hot. Cool, thanks for coming out. Anyone been to the Convex office before? I know some people have, yeah. And it's always good to see the Clerk folks. I feel like everyone who starts a Convex project also starts a Clerk project, so it's not a big surprise that we're good friends. And yeah, Convex, for those who don't know, it's like a real-time database plus backend plus a whole bunch of things. There's everything you need to kind of get things going.
Sorry, we're just gonna.
Yeah. So what does that mean for you? So it means like in TypeScript, you define your database schema, you write functions which are then type safe against that schema, not just type safe, but also safe at runtime. The types that you define for your database schema also become the schema validation. And when you push new code, it validates that all the data matches the schema that you're expecting to run and it atomically switches over. And the queries that you run against that database, you can subscribe to from the front end. So if you have a user and you query for their name and you show their name in like 5 different places across your website, anytime that user's name changes, the data automatically flows through and updates your React hooks. So if you like React, you like Convex. If you like TypeScript, you like Convex. A bunch of good things. Just try it yourself and it will prove itself. I don't need to, I think, sell it. So what I want to talk about today is local first and the kind of combination of local first and servers. Because if you've been following kind of like the local first movement, there's a lot of like excitement around like, oh man, like this is pretty great. We can all just like send each other these changes. There's all these kind of like distributed protocols that are really exciting. And it kind of like leaves the question of like, okay, but like, where does the server fit into this and what's its role and what's really still useful about the server and where do CRDTs and things like that shine and where do they kind of need a little bit more for practical applications? That's and OT sort of changes around using Convex. And I'll show a little demo of what those look like. Yeah, I'm gonna get into it. So there's a lot of terminology and there's a lot of things that are kind of exciting about this world. CRDT stands for conflict-free replicated data type, and OT is operational transformation. We'll actually like look a little bit about that. So I'm just trying to pique your interest a little bit. So really, if you're like, boiling it down, when you're doing certain experiences as, you're building an application, you're either a front-end engineer, full stack engineer, or you're in product, and you're thinking about things that are in nature kind of like rhyme with or look like, co-editing text like Google Docs, Notion, things like that. You should be thinking about like what's a local first experience there, and and I'll also actually just mention briefly like what is this whole local first thing. I know that like different people are either like it's the future of everything, or people are like what the hell are you talking about? Isn't that how we used to write mobile apps? And yeah, back in the day, I worked at Bump, which is actually the Jamie, the CEO of Convex, was the head of engineering at Bump. And this was like a little mobile app that you'd bump your phones together and you'd be able to text, you'd be able to do various things. And of course, on mobile, what does that look like? You like don't assume that the network's there, right? You need to be able to interact with the app. You need to be able to do things without every single interaction going to the server, right? And that is contrasted a little bit from certain web experiences where every like click through is a like round trip that means that if you're on the plane or something, you pretty quickly hit a dead end and you're like, okay, well, I guess I'm gonna have to wait until I arrive in this, in a place with Wi-Fi, or I have to pay the $7, it's the worst. So what is local first? It's basically saying like, hey, can we just treat the local data store as the kind of like primary thing that I'm interacting with and provide an experience that allows you to kind of have like immediate feedback, right? You shouldn't have like spinners every time you hit a keystroke. And basically taking that as the kind of like gold standard for, that's what the interaction should look like, and it should be collaborative, and it should allow you to interact with other users and have your changes kind of like merge when everyone comes back online. And that is where the problem kind of lies. So when you're doing something like co-editing text, it just like, it really asks for some sort of local first solution. So you imagine like, you have some great product, maybe it's like a chat app, and someone's like, hey, we want to add like a little description for the chat, right? Each channel should have a little like text box, like what's this chat about? And so product is like, you just want a little text box. How hard could that be? And you're like, cool, no problem. You make a little text box, and that text box, every time you blur or hit enter or hit a save button, it updates the text, right? Well, now you have two people who have edited it, but they haven't saved. And one of them is going to hit save first, and one of them is going to hit save second, and the changes are going to get overwritten, right? And so product is like, oh, wouldn't it be just so great if they didn't overwrite each other's changes? What if we wanted to make this like, I've viewed this thing Notion, I've used Google Docs, and why can't we make it more like that? And you're like, okay, yeah, cool. Like, no problem, we'll figure something out. So now, like, whereas before you had a pretty simple interaction, right? You take the whole string of text, you send it up to the server commits it, it is like, yes, this is now the version, and it passes it down to every other user. Hopefully you're using something like Convex so that that happens automatically and they don't have to hit refresh on their browser. And now you're like, okay, what is the unit of change? The unit of change is not, here's the whole text, it is, here is an operation I'm performing on this piece of text. And that operation can be described using a couple different technologies. In general, you might just be like, hey, at text offset 5, I want to insert these characters. Or you might say, hey, I'm going to do a really kind of get-based solution where everything is kind of like tracked as a delta from the step before, and I kind of know where I am in the change tree, and like the encoding of the spot that I'm at is this really is this like random number that I've assigned to this position in the text string, and that way if the text moves around, I at least know that I'm like at this place. I kind of go into it because those are the two approaches that we're going to be kind of looking at. So CRDT, conflict-free replicated data type. So in the case of Automerge, which is something that I built a little sync engine for, is basically JSON blobs. You can take a JSON blob and someone else has a JSON blob, and you edit yours and they edit theirs, and then there's a strategy that the CRDT authors kind of choose for you, which is what is the resulting piece of JSON at the end when you've done it. I've added a field, I added a couple of things to the array, I've removed some things, they've done some other edits, they've moved some text around, what is the final result? And operational transform, very similar, it encodes things as what is the operation that I'm taking on top of the canonical data. But for operational transforms, the big change that is that like there is in some ways a linear history, and when you want to make a change, you have to rebase your changes on top of that. So if you all use Git, which you should, it's basically an idea of like, are you merging or are you rebasing your changes? So there was hat, and then user A changed it to bat, and user B changed it to heat, and then user A changed it to bats, user B changed it to meat. And then what happens when it merges? CRDTs are they basically like decide for you, hey, we will converge it to something, right? And depending on which order the first letters changed, it might be beats, it might be meats. Rebasing is like, from an operational transform, sort of standpoint, there's a server version 1 that is then moved to version 2, that is then moved to version 3. And this is because this person happens to have committed first. And then this other user had made some changes, but before they're allowed to just send that up to the server, they have to rebase it off of the server's version, and then they can submit them. And that's actually a decision point for the user B then says, hey, now that I've rebased these changes, I can actually kind of scratch my head and say, is this still what I want, right? Like, these two users, when they've submitted their changes to the server, like they don't know that like what the combination of what the changes, like what that's going to result in. They're kind of like blindly throwing changes around, maybe to each other in like a peer-to-peer way, maybe just like up to the server. And the rebasing approach kind of has the benefit of like, okay, there is a like server, minted ordering of these things, and at every step, the server can say yes, 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 right? And the clients all kind of know. Now, what does that mean for in practice? That means that it's actually hard to do kind of peer-to-peer stuff with OT because it kind of like wants this linear history, and it means that you end up getting convergences that maybe don't encapsulate the intent of the original change for CRDTs. I know that that's a bit of a whirlwind, and people who have PhDs in this might want to like really give me a talking to after this, but that's my mental model. So let's actually look at an example of this. So we have a text field and another text field. There are two websites. Let's type some text, right? And this is going up to the server and back down through Convex. We can see here that we just had a bunch of new changes. Actually, let's see if I can do that. Okay, so, right, so you see the changes over here, kind of like flying in. And what do I want to show here? And for Automerge, this is Automerge. They allow you to do some nifty things, and you can, because it's just like these JSON objects, right? You can encode a lot of things as JSON that you then put into your product. And when you look at what that looks like in code, right? This is like, we've got our main.tsx. We have like a Convex client. We have an Automerge repo. We I made a little like sync function that keeps them in sync. And then we just, let's see. We grab the handle and we do, and then it's just more straightforward React stuff. We show tasks, we iterate over the document. When the text changes, we have Automerge detect what was the change that is going to be encoded, and we call the Automerges provided like change this document. And that under the hood will, do the local persistence. It will make the change. It will encode it into a like, this is the, this is the new kind of version in the set of changes, and then Convex will sync those changes up. Other clients will be like, oh, new version, who dis? And they'll like pull down all the changes, they'll apply them locally, and they'll all stay in sync. So the way to think about it is, you have this peer-to-peer, for Automerge, you have this peer-to-peer network where people can throw changes around to each other, but they can also pass them up to the server. The server can, notify other browsers of new changes because it's all just kind of like syncing under the hood. And let's see, let's also look at, then the other thing that I'll be kind of like showing is prose mirror. So prose mirror, operational transform, specifically for text editing. So if somebody really says like, hey, no, I want Notion. And the cool thing about Notion is I can like make lists, and I can use these fun like markdown, but I can also like highlight stuff and bold it. And isn't that just so cool? H1s, they're new. So Prose Mirror does a great job of kind of giving you that experience. Well, it did a great job of like building the foundation. On top of Prose Mirror, there have been companies that make it even easier. So TipTap is a great library, which is what I'm using here, that kind of like gives you all these fun extensions that you can put in, that like turn smiley faces into emojis, and turn the dash space into a bullet list, things like that. So these are great technologies. Operational transform, this is an example of it. And this is also using a little convex sync engine that I've been working on. And we can kind of actually, at the end, I'll share these links and we can play around and you can kind of get a sense for like how it feels to actually be using them. When there's a ton of people editing, the changes will kind of like come in. You'll see, things kind of like move around, and the more people there are, the Automerge will kind of like, because the changes can kind of just like fly in willy-nilly, it can kind of like feel a little more fluid. And with these approaches, you're often like rebasing a ton of changes, and then someone else is rebasing a ton of changes, and you can kind of like get these discrete state changes. But we'll play around with that. And just to show you what the code looks like for Prosmir, we have a similar setup where we have convex provider, and then we grab for Prosmir. This is where you toss in a bunch of fun extensions and things like that, and then you just like use their use editor and throw it into their kind of editor provider. But like the difference here is that Automerge, you're like, cool, I have this JSON object. I'm working really directly with that data, turning it into my own UI. With things like Prosmir and TipTap, BlockNote, they're all kind of built on the same stack. What they give you is a lot of these features, but what they end up doing is they kind of take control. They say like, hey, I'm going to manage this whole editor experience for you, right? And then you have to decide, okay, cool, like, well, how do I get the results out, and what does that all kind of look like? And so just the same way with, so this was the Automerge kind of like changes flying in. You can see that, I think I'm done with you. There's like these changes, they're an incremental change, and they have just a bunch of data that's encoded into the really efficient binary format. You can. They have a nice WASM, module that you can plop in, and you can ask them to give you a more informative thing. That's why I had like the debug dump column. I don't know if you noticed this. I at one point just like could hit a flag to kind of like also dump in the human readable version of that, so that I could like be trying to get an intuition for these things. Operational transforms for Prosmir, similar deal, right? There's like snapshots, and then there's like deltas. And if you haven't worked with these sorts of systems before, it's essentially like snapshot is like my doc, my actual doc. I have all of it. I can read all of it. And then there's either incremental changes or steps or snap, or there's a bunch of other terms you might use, operations that you might stack on top of that. And all of those only make sense if you know what you're basing it on top of. So for the, if we go to this example, like this, let's say that this was a snapshot, and then this actually isn't being saved as bat, it's being saved as like replace H with B here, and so on, right? And then once in a while, what you can do is you can collapse it back up, make another snapshot, and be like, cool, now we have bats. And now everyone doesn't have to download the full Git history. They only have to download bats, and from then on, they can make changes. And I know I'm just dumping a ton of information that might not be super relevant to you, but one other consideration if you are deciding between different local first technologies for operational transforms, they're very much, the unit of change is the delta. And the delta is based on the last snapshot. And so when you have a snapshot, it actually just says hat. There's nothing else in there. It just says hat. And then the delta encodes something that is based on the previous step. That makes sense. And then when you make a new collapsed one, this says just bats. It has 4 bytes to its name. That's it. For the merge-based solutions, because they might be merged with a point from anywhere else in the tree, right? Like you imagine in Git, every Git commit kind of like knows what its like head was, what like the previous commit was, but it might get merged with something else. And because of that, it needs to know the full tree in order to kind of like be merged back in. And as a result of that, you end up having the snapshot actually, like if this is our new snapshot, it would actually encompass all of these changes and just hide them away in like a really efficient little like change log inside of it. But you couldn't just start with bat and apply this change. It would be like, well, yeah, sure, it's bat, but like what was it before that? Because in order for me to merge, I need to know what bat was before and to know like the logical, like causal set of events. Like CRDTs care about like the causal chain, like, oh, it's not just that I added an S here. When I'm merging with over there, I need to know that like this B used to be an H, someone else made a change for that H to become an M, and the CRDT needs to figure out the whole web of kind of causal changes that results in this. It's like similar to how when you do git merge, it has to choose a strategy for what was the intent of each of these changes based on where they were in the tree. So that's, you know, a lot more information than you probably needed, but what it looks like for Prosemir, for operational transforms, it looks very similar, right? You have like, you know, you'll see like, okay, replacing from index 2. So this is like actually, you know, probably like an insert index 2 to index 2. You add the character C, right? Pretty verbose for adding a single character to a string. So you can accumulate many of these deltas, but the nice thing about this kind of like schema is once you've made that new snapshot, and like you can start garbage collecting those old deltas as long as no one else needs to know, no one else was like basing their changes off of it and need to know like how to rebase off of the new version. So yeah, I think that's all. I should probably just move on a little bit. But any quick questions?
Wondering how you think about like UX. You have a situation where you need a human to decide how things are working. Like even in for example, some users complete everything and then some users make normal changes. Like how do you like the GitHub is a pull request that you can do that sort of work, but for digital app where users
Yeah.
How do you think about that for UX?
Totally. Yeah, so the question is around how do you think about merging changes and handling conflicts as part of that, but in general, just how do you kind of like navigate the merging? And this is actually like an important piece of the consideration when you're thinking about building a local first app is what control do you actually maintain over having that merge happen on your terms? Like with a CRDT, like essentially you're abdicating responsibility to the CRDT. You're saying, these changes all happened, please tell me the result. And these libraries will be like, cool, here's the result. And you might be like, but why? Or you might be like, ooh, I don't agree. But like that is you've decided to use that technology to make that merge change happen for you. And you could walk through all the steps and be like, nah, I don't really like you could say, hey, there's a maximum length that I allow this string to be. And user A added 50 characters and user B added 50 characters. When I merge that together, it's going to be too long, right? So you could walk through each change and as you're combining them, be like, sorry, this one doesn't fly. And you can have your like manual intervention step there be something that you decide. But ultimately, like to answer more directly, I'd say that like when there are things that are actually important to the correctness of your app, like things like who is the owner of this document? What is, you know, some invariant that like there is no cycle in a graph. When those things happen, as much as you can encode those as logical changes that you yourself make, right? That like you have the code that actually makes those changes and you apply that on the server in an authoritative way. And like you mint that as the like, this is now the correct version. As much as you can have that be like a centralized piece of logic. And this is where actually this is like perfect tee up for this is like the question around like how do you merge data is entirely, or not entirely, but is so deeply entrenched in the semantics of your product. the feature, what is the user's intent when they make a change? Was their intent to, like, one person deletes, another person modifies, right? A sane thing to do would be like, keep it around because maybe they care about it, because the modification implies that they care about it, right? But if, like, what if it was deleted because of, for legal reasons, right? Like, what if it was a user requested that their data be deleted, and another user's like, hey, by the way, like, I'm syncing this other user's change that was passed to me. Like, this user still exists, and here's a bunch of information about them. Like, I don't know. Maybe that's like a contrived example, but like, yeah, there's a lot to say about who owns the modification of your data and who do you trust to own the modification of your data. And using these strategies are great for getting convergence, and for text editing, it makes a lot of sense. And this is why I'm focusing on text editing. When multiple people are editing a text field, it's actually very natural for there to be a change that doesn't make sense. Like, they didn't really want meets to be the answer. But because they're both looking at the text field, one of them clicks in and deletes the character and makes it what they want, right? So that is somewhere where the modification is directly surfaced to the user. They have control and they can make a change to remedy the situation. So you're putting the user in control of that. And then for situations where it's actually really important for the system to guarantee certain properties, it's important for that change to be encoded and applied in a way that you actually maintain control of code. Whew, that was a lot of talking. Yes?
I didn't understand what the CRDT does. I didn't quite understand what the CRDT does.
You don't understand what the CRDT is? That's the question?
Yeah, I don't know it just had question marks in the diagram there.
Yeah, so actually what it will do is it will construct what it believes to be a good causal change. It'll actually I'll probably end up with something like this, but it will decide, okay, for everything that didn't conflict, it will just apply the changes. But it will also just decide for you, hey, H turned into both B and M. Well, this user wins in this case, right? And it's not just a randomness thing, it's a deterministic randomness thing, so that what this converges to, if it converges to meets, every single client will agree, yes, meets is the new beats. And that's the important property that CRDTs provide. It's they converge to something and every client can agree on it. That way you can pass these changes around and it doesn't matter what order people receive these, but they'll always arrive at the same result. Question in the back.
It'd be good to illustrate a simple set CRDT.
A simple set, yeah. So so CRDTs are different data types that you can encode with a CRDT, and something like a set is an example where it's much clearer what the convergent value is, because you can either insert, remove, and those sorts of operations commute very naturally together. At the end, everyone agrees that if these ones were added and these ones were removed, then this is what we have. So that, yeah.
Because it's a simple data type to demonstrate that.
Yeah.
So am I right in thinking that CRDTs can be done in a distributed manner, where a team has to have authoritative server as one person that makes it marketable, whereas CRDTs can be distributed without a single
Yeah, that's generally the properties associated with them, yeah.
So can you run any of this stuff on a Cloudflare worker or a Cloudflare just durable object?
Is that the question?
Yes.
Can you? Yes, there is a little bit of nuance. Automerge has with this WASM thing, so you have to figure out how to mount the right module to actually run it. But ultimately, the question boils down to can you do this in a serverless environment, right? Can you do this in a it's for operational transforms? Essentially, what you need is a serializable source of reference, right? You say what version am I at? What does the next change, like when I insert the next change, what is that version? And propagate that out to everything else. The question, yeah, and then there's just a question of like getting all the clients to be in sync, and what does that protocol look like, and what are the technology you use. But I'm gonna push on, and we can chat more about other things. We talked a little bit about this already, so it's like, question around is like, where does the server and how does the server's authority kind of like fit into local first apps? So, you know, if you have this mesh of users who are all passing changes around to each other, right, then it kind of like raises some questions that you have to answer from a product point of view. Like, who's actually allowed to change what, right? Like if your whole data model was this JSON object that is like a CRDT that anyone can modify, can I change someone else's name? Can I change someone else's billing address? Like, can I set my own quota to something? It's like, so the question is like, what data is actually being passed around? What data makes sense to be passed around and edited in a collaborative way? Who is allowed to edit what? So if I, you know, have some collaborative text like document, can anyone submit changes to it? And if not, what is the kind of authorization model? And let's see, yeah, and there's some other, you know, considerations here that ultimately like mean that, you know, in practical circumstances, what you're not going to end up with is your whole application fitting into a CRDT or a JSON object that gets passed around and changed. What you're going to end up with is a regular application that happens to have part of its state managed in a way that can be easily merged, right? So you have a users table, you have an accounts and billing and, you know, subscriptions, and you have, you know, all this metadata that is secret, private, wants to be hidden from users, stored on the server. And then you have specific parts of your application, like text editing, where you allow browsers to kind of like do more like optimistic changes and have all those changes kind of like merged in a way that you, that just kind of like makes it really convenient for users to be able to work in an offline way and have those edits kind of sync in a reasonable enough manner when they come back online. And yeah, so, you know, the idea here is like, don't forget that like there's a lot of power in kind of like server authority in making changes to your document that are transactional with other parts of your application, in holding secrets, in kind of like managing conflicts in a centralized way. And just like, as you're thinking about building local first experiences, just, you know, keep in mind like what is the responsibility of the server and what is the responsibility of the client, and entrusting each with things that make sense. So we actually, yeah, so I think it'd be fun and a little chaotic for us all to hop into the same document.
I think there are some of us that are already on.
Yeah, some may have already figured out the URL. And so let's all just, you know, hop into this Automerge document and just kind of see, let's see. And, you know, it's just like, so, you know, you can kind of get a sense for what do you want to, what would you trust to, like, you know, to have your data converge to. And so like sometimes you make changes that are then overwritten by other people, and sometimes you don't. And yeah, geez Louise. Okay, great. And you can see here that like, you know, these changes are all just being kind of like streamed in, right? And so under the hood, what's happening is like changes are being emitted. Each client's like, hey, what's the server version? What's my version? Upload my changes, download their changes. And it's using Convex subscriptions to kind of like power that. And all the other clients, all they need to do is just be syncing down the necessary changes, and everyone kind of stays in sync. Technically, they can actually be syncing changes peer-to-peer, and you can have it sync between your browser tabs so that even when you're offline, you edit in one place and your other browser tab stays in sync. And so this is fun to just, you know, see these fly through. And I don't know. Yeah, it's a bit, silly. But then the other demo is this kind of like prose mirror editor. So if anyone wants to help battle test, I was just finished up this component yesterday that syncs these documents. So this is going to be really the true test of whether it holds up. And I will say that I'm playing around with these different technologies, and I'm developing more of an opinion about what's the right place to use these different things. It's Automerge is really fun for some of this CRDT kind of merging reasons. Prose Mirror is a great text editor experience, right? I did the minimalist version of this, but there's just so much in the ecosystem, plugins and otherwise, that can give you a really polished feeling experience. And I don't think I've actually gotten to the end of what the right solution for everyone is. So I'm going to continue to work on this. We also have our own sync engine, or our local sync object store that I am really looking forward. Yeah, dark mode is, oh geez. The other one had dark mode and this one doesn't. Isn't that embarrassing? Let's just, yep. Anywho, so, geez, oh boy, I just kept talking, huh? I'm sorry. Cool. So, yeah, use local first for text editing, but leverage server authority, and you can sync it with Convex. That's it.
This is a microphone? Holy shit. Oh, so wait, you said it's a database? What kind of database is it? Can I do other queries? Can I use it with Postgres or what?
It's a transactional database that is also, you can just dump arbitrary JSON into there, right? It's an object store, but there's also, you can define relationships. It has indexes. It has everything strictly serializable transactions. So it's fully ACID compliant, and yeah, you do a lot of the things that you do with a normal relational database. And I don't know, does that kind of answer your question? We have our yeah?
Cool. I'm surprised you didn't mention that part.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool thing. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do,
yeah, we'll do more questions after.
Cool,
I ran over because I'm.
You'll be around. This
Yeah,
is
I'll be
really
around.
awkward to.
Yeah.
I feel very silly holding this up like this. This is fun. No, this is great. This is great. No, this is really cool. I also have some questions for you.
Yeah,
You'll be hanging around?
I'll be hanging around.
Okay, cool. Next up, actually, how about another round of applause for Ian? Awesome, thank you. Next up, we've got Simon, talking about local first mobile apps,
Yes.
React Native. All right.
Yes. Do I get the box?
If you want. If you want.
No, I'll use the lapel thing. Cool.
I also heard there was a meetup called Local Thirst.
I went to a meetup called
Okay.
Local Thirst, and it was drinking beer and talking about local first. It was great. Let's see if this. Sweet. Okay, cool. So, hey everyone, I'm here today to talk to you about surprise local first. But specifically, though, I wanted to put a different spin on it. So we're going to talk about local first with React Native. So this is me. I run engineering at a startup down in Palo Alto. I actually have 3 kids, but only 2 are in this photo. My older one is too cool to take selfies with dad. But I've been in the React Native ecosystem for a long time. I worked at YouTube. I've been at Facebook. I had a startup. We went through Y Combinator. And so what are we going to talk about today? Well, the one thing we're not going to talk about is AI, which is awesome. don't get me wrong, I do enjoy talking about AI. This is just like a relief because it's the first time I've had a talk that has nothing to do with AI in a while, and so I love that. So instead, we're going to talk about application development. And I realized after I made this slide deck that my slides look like Jeopardy, and that was not intentional. I just used the template, and so anyway, bear with me. So more specifically, we're going to talk about why your app is shitty, but but in the context of UX, and I think it's going to be I think it's going to be valuable. So, but first, let's take a little journey with me back to 2007. And we have these two gentlemen who were working on building a product. So this is Arash and Drew. And as the story goes, our buddy Drew here was, as you do in 2007, you keep your documents on like a USB thumb drive, right? And you go to your desktop computer and you work on your documents, and then you need to go, catch a bus or do whatever you got to do. So you take your thumb drive with you, and you plug it into your laptop, and you're on the go, and you have all your documents with you, right? So, or in his words, I was on the bus, I forgot my thumb drive, and I was so frustrated, and I never want to have this problem again. So in that moment, Drew opened up his code editor and started coding on a solution to this problem. And so this is Drew Houston. And so as many of you may know, the solution that he came up with was Dropbox, right? Dropbox was really revolutionary, I think, at the time, even though I think a lot of people sort of made fun of it, and they were like, well, it just sells you for a monthly fee what you can do with, like rsync and a command line tool and a Linux box on Linode and all these things. But like normal people don't have all that set up. But Dropbox, or at least why I want to illustrate Dropbox or why I want to talk about it, is because in the Dropbox paradigm, for those of you who've used it, it's for those of you who haven't, it's kind of similar to what a lot of the iCloud Drive and various things are today. But at the time, this was sort of the first of its kind. All your files are stored in full on your local computer, right? So you don't need connectivity. You don't need to remember to plug in a USB drive. You just kind of work on your files as you would, right? Everything works without connectivity because it's on your local computer. And then when the network is available, whatever changes you made are just synced up through the cloud to not only to a copy that's on a server in the cloud, but also what's on your home desktop computer. So if your desktop computer maybe isn't even on, you're working on your laptop, gets synced up to the cloud later, gets synced down to your desktop. And as a bonus, then you can also like share a file or a folder with your mom, and she can drop some photos in that folder, and you can put some photos, and it just kind of syncs up nicely. So anyway, I'm not here to sell you on Dropbox. I think Dropbox is great, but what I really want to illustrate is this is local first, right? I mean, like way before the term was around, I think what they were doing is essentially local first, or is essentially what we're here to talk about. So, or to put it another way, the availability of another computer should never prevent you from getting your work done on your computer, which is a quote from Martin Kleppmann, who is the person who coined the term local first. So I think Dropbox was really ahead of its time, ahead of the curve. And it's not like we didn't have, like the components on which Dropbox was built sort of existed even back then, right? Even in 2007 or around that era, which is that like you might remember Outlook or Exchange. It's not like whenever you disconnect from the internet, you couldn't read the email that you had downloaded that morning. It was all sitting there on your local computer. And then when you plug back in, it would like sync up with an Exchange server or whatever, right? And so that was really useful in corporate environments where you may or may not be on the corporate network. We had Google Docs, which isn't really local first, but it had some aspects of it, the multiplayer, the collaborative piece. Git kind of is sort of local first. It doesn't automatically sync, but you can certainly have an entire copy of your code base locally. You can work on that code. You can imagine how frustrating it would be if like every time you wanted to like edit or download or open a file in VS Code, you had to like watch a spinner while it's like trying to connect to the network, and then it's like, sorry, but you don't have to because it's all local. It's all on your computer. Now, if you install a Chrome extension, I think. But you're right, no, it does. And I think that kind of was an afterthought. But yeah, we could certainly, I guess, like debate the sort of virtues of Google Docs. I think that they kind of took a sprinkling offline, a little bit of offline, after the fact kind of approach. But no, you're totally right. So anyway, you could even argue like BitTorrent was kind of local first because you would have a bunch of local files or maybe even bits of a file, and like somebody across the world would have that. And then through some really cool like peer-to-peer protocol, you would share some bits with them and they would share some bits with you. And eventually it would be consistent that everybody had the full file, right? So these are all not specifically local first, but I think they kind of embodied a lot of the tech or concepts that local first is built on. So with all of that in mind, let's kind of jump forward now to modern day, to 2024, almost 2025. Let's get back to our question about like, why is your app shitty? And this maybe isn't your app specifically, although it might be, but I think this is a statement more about like mobile apps these days and like what sucks about them or what we've done wrong in this journey. And so I think, sure, your app is too slow, and it doesn't necessarily mean that like you're not getting 60 FPS like React re-renders or whatever. I think it's just that like you're watching spinners, you like press a button, like a save button, and then your button itself, like the text turns to a spinner, and you're like, why am I waiting on this? So we've got, you know, apps that are completely useless without network connectivity. We've got weird errors. So if the network is like failing and a user presses save, they just get a weird error that's like 503 gateway failure, and the user's like, should I try again? Like, what am I supposed to do here? You know, and it's largely, some apps are kind of real time, but a lot of them are just kind of not seamless and not real time. So this is kind of what I'm talking about, right? Like if you've ever seen an app and there's like 4 or more spinners on the page at a time, then we're doing something wrong as a society, as developers, as a community, as humans. And so this isn't totally your fault, right? Because if you all have come, you know, if your journey has come to software development the way mine has through web development, that is why we do these patterns, right? Like the web was built around the server being the source of truth and us having to make round trips to the server every time you press a button, right? Like, I mean, fundamentally, you know, at its origins, it was a document that was displayed in a, you know, an HTML document, and you'd click a link, and then the browser would go tell the server, hey, the user clicked the thing, what should I display next? And the server would tell it what to display. And so we kind of got into this kind of pattern of, you know, server being the source of truth and server driving the experience, and everything needs to talk to the server kind of as soon as some event happens. And also, you know, we didn't really have any persistent storage in the browser for a lot of years, right? That wasn't really possible to do anything much better than that. And, you know, largely speaking, kind of what we're talking about, like offline support is sort of something we thought about afterwards. We're like, oh, whoops, how can we like cache something cleverly to make it work if the network connection goes down? So if you came in, you know, to mobile development from web development, we kind of brought these paradigms with us over to mobile, and there's no reason to do that, right? Like mobile as a platform was never something that needed to like display spinners everywhere, but we ended up doing that. So I think we can do better. And so I think the ideal UX is that we have these like snappy, immediate interactions, just like if you were using not a local first, but a an actual local software, you know, on a Windows 95 machine a long time ago, when we didn't have all these spinners, you would just press a button and a thing would happen, right? I think that it should be fully, you know, I think we can make mobile apps that are fully functional offline or online. Obviously we want our changes to like sync across devices, and ideally we want it to be conflict free. Like it'd be really nice if we took a bunch of the really cool ideas from Git, but not merge conflicts, right? We don't want merge conflicts in our, you know, prose mirror. So how would we even get there? Like, what would we do to kind of get the ideal list of kind of feature requests that we just showed? Well, I mean, like what I'm describing, I think, you know, many of you would know as like the tech on which we build local first, which is that we have a full copy of all data, or all relevant data at the minimum, locally, stored locally, kind of like how Git would store that on your computer. And this local copy should be the source of truth, right? This should be like whenever you read or write to something, whenever you do a CRUD operation, you're not going and sending somebody to the server, you're just making that change to your local kind of source of truth. The UI is fully reactive, which means that whenever, you know, you press, what's the famous example? Like you press read on a notification, the little bell icon on the top where it says 3 notifications should go down to 2, right? Because you just read one, right? So this component shouldn't necessarily know about the bell component and the little badge. It should just write to the local database, and then because everything's reactive, that bell is subscribed to that local database and everything updates nicely, right? So, and then of course we should have this like 2-way sync between your local kind of source of truth and then either some remote or some server or whatever is out there on the web, so that we can sync between the two. Okay, how would we achieve this in React Native? Well, let's kind of go through those bullet points that we just described and think about like how we would do this if we didn't really have a blog post to follow, when we just like thinking like engineers. And we're like, okay, step 1, store a full copy of the data completely locally. Well, we'd probably just reach for async storage or SQLite, right? Like pretty straightforward. There's like some third-party stuff like PouchDB or whatever, but like we would probably just use the, you know, one of the first 2 ones, right? Easy, right? Moving on. Okay, UI is fully reactive. It is really cool when it works, and it sounds like a really hard problem, but we don't have to solve that because other people have solved that for us. So we're just going to use like one of these like cool, and I'm sure there's a dozen more. There's a reason why I picked a few of these that maybe aren't the most popular or the one, maybe not the ones that you've used, but these are just some examples. So like Drizzle lately is a nice little ORM that we can run over top of our little local SQLite, and it will give us live queries, and there's a bunch of others. So in this case, we're just talking about pulling in state management that can kind of give us reactive UI on top of our local database or persistent store. Then we get to, okay, sure, we've checked box 1, we've checked box 2. Now we just need two-way sync between local and remote databases. How hard can this be? And it turns out like this is the hard parts, right? So like the talk we just heard, which is like diving into like the nitty-gritty, is like, that's why this is hard, right? So this talk is more of like a zoomed out, like 30,000 foot view of, okay, I don't want to write that necessarily myself. At the minimum, if I do want to write my own, I want to at least use just a library like YJS or something, so I don't have to, like read the white paper or the PhD papers on this stuff. But we may not even have to write our own, right? Like it might make sense to, especially if you're using a tool. But like, why don't we just use something like PowerSync? It's off the shelf. It isn't free. You got to pay for it. You do have to like do some stuff in your backend to make it work. We've actually got a few of those that we're going to talk about. And then there's this like zero sync one that I'm kind of hopeful for. It's at the bottom. I've seen some cool demos with it. It's coming soon, maybe, hopefully. But it's from the folks who have built Replicache, and I think it's going to be neat. So anyway, we need a syncing engine. But it still feels like we just saw like 3 separate lists that each have multiple options. And so the permutations of things that we're going to have to piece together feel like a lot. So could we just like pull some kind of all-in-one solution or like just grab something off the shelf that kind of does everything? And I do think we have a few choices there. So like the number one here, InstantDB, is relatively new, but it's like a complete solution. They host. It's kind of like Firebase for, actually we have a slide on it, but it's kind of like Firebase for local first in the sense that you kind of get everything out of the box. Tinybase is a cool state management library, but then we can like plug in on top of that some sort of a synchronizer over WebSockets. Kind of same thing with like Legend State. It's a cool state management system. We can plug things over top of that. And then we'll talk about LiveStore last. Okay, so InstantDB, I think it's really neat. It is, it's like purpose built for what we're describing, right? So it's fully hosted. It is specifically around kind of letting them handle all of this for you. I think it's probably the easiest way to get going. And they do kind of offer a like kind of React native library thing that you can just do, right? So it is a paid offering. Parts of it are open source. I haven't like done anything like super production worthy with it, but I think it's certainly worth checking out. Option number 2, which is Tinybase. I really like Tinybase as like sort of a state management solution. Plus they have local first apps written right at their homepage. So like clearly either that's become a buzzword or this is a really good solution for that. But you do have to like layer on an additional persistence piece because Tinybase at its core is like just a state management library, right? So you got to tell it how to persist locally, but it comes with plugins for SQLite, and like they even have a fully working Expo demo that I will show you at the end if we have time. We'll just kind of hopefully live demo, and I didn't have to write the code; like it was kind of done for me. So I think that's pretty neat. The sync stuff for this, I feel like, is less mature. It's more of like a broker that, like, if you have 2 active clients that both have active WebSockets, it'll kind of like pass messages back and forth so that they can stay in sync, but it doesn't really, it's not like a full-blown server-side solution. But I think it's like a good starting point that you can then build on. So next we have kind of another state management solution. So this is Legend State. And so again, state management library. Do they have local first on their homepage? They do. So clearly a good choice. You do have to plug in some persistence and some sync plugins, but it is a really mature solution, and it also has like first-party support for things like Supabase, which I think is a really cool cloud-hosted Postgres kind of built on Postgres thing. So, okay, the last thing that I want to talk about, which I think might be the most exciting thing here, which is still kind of in private preview, is LiveStore. And so I just got access to this last week. I've been playing with it. I think it is probably of the solutions we've looked at today, the most kind of like open source and purpose built for local first, for what we're doing as developers. And it supports Expo and just kind of React Web right out of the box. Comes from the founders of Prisma, but it is in early access, so we'll kind of watch and see how that takes shape. We've got a few runners up that I think might be useful. So Prisma has an offering, Prisma React Native, which is really new. It only runs on the new architecture, which came out like 2 weeks ago. It doesn't have sync. They say yet. They say it's coming. They even have like some draft PR, some draft code that you can use to try to like emulate it. But Electric SQL I think is really cool, but is mostly kind of focused on the web and doesn't really have a strong React Native offering at all. And then Zero Sync, which is still closed beta, but I've seen some demos of it that I think is pretty neat. So these are my kind of runners up. I will give you links to all these. I have a QR code at the end with links. But I want to tell one last sort of story to kind of bring it all together, to kind of illustrate why any of this like matters. And so a buddy of mine runs a bunch of conferences, and he used to run Reactathon, and now he runs a bunch of like the series of AI engineer conferences. And so back in June, the AI World's Fair was run here in San Francisco. And so me and my buddy got together and we're like, well, let's build a mobile app for this. It'll be fun. We'll open source it. We'll build it on React Native, and it'll be like like the conference schedule, right? You can pull it up and you can like bookmark something and say I'm interested in this, and then you can see your list of interested ones. And so we built this app. We built it in React Native. We shipped it, and we shipped a really cool feature where you could like scan someone's badge. So this is like us trying to demo our app at the conference that we had put together. And it's like, hey, look, you can just like pull out your camera and scan someone's like badge, and then it'll immediately show you who they are, and you can like them or friend them on LinkedIn or whatever. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever tried Wi-Fi at a conference, but it turns out it's not great. And so we ran into some struggles, naturally. And so this isn't the error message that I wanted to show you, but it was the closest one I could find. And so this particular error message might not have been solved by local first, but pretend like it would be. So people were seeing stuff like this in our app. And the reason this is the one I could find is because like naturally people put it on Twitter. They're like, why doesn't this app work? This app sucks. And it turns out, I don't think the app sucked. I mean, maybe the app sucked, but I think we did exactly what an app developer, or especially a web developer, would do. You build a CRUD app with a bunch of content that lives on a server that says, hey, here are the talks, here are the attendees, here are the speakers, here are the presenters, here are the sessions, and the timetable and local attractions and a map of where to find the restroom in the venue and all these things. We just put it on a server, and then when you open the app, it just makes a REST call, or in our case, we're using gRPC, but it just makes a call to the server and says, hey, give me the list of presenters. Poof, here's the list of presenters. Like not an absurd thing to do, but it turned out kind of an absurd thing to do, because I'm like, well, like, how are we thinking this is going to pan out? So I think the answer to this, or the lesson learned the hard way, is that don't depend on network connectivity if you can avoid it. And of all the apps in the world, something that serves up fairly static content would be a perfect example of something that should have been local first. Even if there's like some networking features in there where you can like connect with another attendee and bookmark a session. I think local first would have been a great choice for this. And so for the next conference, we're doing local first. And so I think if I've done nothing else, hopefully kind of convince you that like there's a really good use case for these tools, and there's a bunch of tools available. And I think as developers, we can put the two together and make something awesome. So thank you for listening. That's what I have for today. And I have a bunch of links here if you are interested in any of this stuff. Cool.
All right. I don't know if I can throw it all.
We have to get the...
Here we go.
Hey there, it's James from Convex. Love all this. And in full disclosure, some of us wrote the sync protocol at Dropbox. And
oh, wow.
Jamie in particular, actually lots of people here. So on board with all this, I got this interesting question about this concept of source of truth, and I'm interested in your take on it. So I would consider at Dropbox, the source of truth is the server. So if you throw your laptop away, get a new one, the files all download from the server, and if you have a collaborative use case and I make a whole bunch of changes and I throw my laptop away, the server's the authoritative entity. So like in Dropbox, everything you do on the client is kind of cached and queued up and available and really rich, but the source of truth at the end of the day is the server. That's where the where you decide the files that really are in your folder. And right. we can debate like the nomenclature of source of truth, but do you feel like the future of local first is one where like the client truly is the source of truth, like that is the authoritative, most important version of the state, or that the client's just kind of really rich and has access to the state, but at the end of the day, like the server is the real copy?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the short answer is like, I don't care if my user experience is great and it's snappy and it's fantastic. Maybe it doesn't matter. But no, I think to answer your question, I would think of it like how we use GitHub as our source of truth. And if I throw my laptop away, I have my code on GitHub, and it is the source of truth in the sense that like, if you and me both have a copy clone down, we're not going to pull from each other. We're going to pull from GitHub. But that is almost an implementation detail. Like there's nothing about the Git protocol that requires that. It's just that we're going to agree that GitHub is our source of truth. And then tomorrow, if we switch to GitLab, we might choose that that's our source of truth. And it has some features that kind of implicitly make it the source of truth, like the pull request comments are on there and not on my local, whatever. But and then of course, like, there are certain things for which you absolutely need a canonical source of truth. Like if I'm selling concert tickets, I need to know which seats are filled and which seats aren't, right? I can't be Ticketmaster and just be like, oh, it's like a community-driven event, whoever, like, no, you need a source of truth there. So sure, there's absolutely times where that makes a huge difference. And so, yeah, you're going to end up with that. I think at a protocol level, what's interesting is that like you can architect this in a way that like most of what the infra does, maybe the edge compute or the endpoints or whatever, is just like passing messages, sync messages and being a broker, passing them back and around, and it doesn't really care who's in charge. And then you just have one node that you decide is the kind of like main kind of primary source of truth. But like at the protocol level, it's just another node, and it's just going to get things passed to it. I don't know if that's an oversimplification or hand wavy, but like I think there probably is a future in which we have some really nice protocols that are more like Git, and then we get to choose which is going to be like our kind of main upstream repo.
Yeah, like it's an evolving field, right? And there's like these apps like Linear, right, who are like held up as like really shiny examples of this field. I think in Linear, the source of truth is the server, right? Like if I go and mark a task as complete on a plane, it doesn't really get marked as complete until I reconnect to Wi-Fi. I think there's also apps that are like a truly distributed, right? Like that, like if my laptop says it's done, and it's just interesting to me which direction this field will go. I mean, I have a horse in the race. Obviously, I think the server is the source of truth, but like I think one could conceivably argue the other direction.
Sure.
But it's a very strong statement, right? It's a strong statement that kind of servers are secondary to clients.
Yeah, and it would probably have very niche applications. I think for your typical application, you need something that you, as the organization who's in charge, controls, that is kind of the source of truth. Maybe another way of kind of framing, maybe I'm using the term source of truth to mean multiple things. So from the mobile app perspective, it doesn't even have to know there exists a server, right? For my, as an application developer, I just query my local database, and I just trust that whatever syncing engine in place has like done its job, and so I can treat that as the source of truth. It doesn't mean that it's the like globally the source of truth. Maybe that's a better way to kind of frame it.
As you were talking, I was thinking about Excalibur. If you don't pay, if you pay, then it's like a server authority, I would say.
That's right.
And if you don't pay and you share a link and we start working together, like we have a trusted community between you and me, and what's saved on your hard drive and my hard drive are the same. So
yeah,
then it's like serverless.
That's a pretty cool.
That's not the word.
Yeah.
It's not serverless, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a solid example. Yeah. And in that case, it doesn't really matter because it's just a scratch pad for the two of us, right? Yeah. But it's a Fama roll or whatever, right? Makes sense.
I'm curious about your mental model when you're dealing with like large enough data where you like have maybe like in the attendee case at the AI conference, you have like 1 million people coming. You can't necessarily request all that data. It's going to be paginated, whatever. Like, does the mobile experience just kind of become like, okay, you have the first 100 attendees and like now you can interact with them, favorite, bookmark, filter, or like is that like a necessity that you like request all the data before that mobile experience becomes, or like before it's a fully like local first experience?
Yeah, I think I would even extrapolate that. to like a social network, right? Because if you have like the attendee, connecting stuff is maybe a, primitive social network, but like, let's even extrapolate that further and say like Twitter, right? Like the Twitter app could never be fully, I can't download all of Twitter to my device. So they just have to use smarter paradigms, right? And so maybe it turns out that there's some like edge server that does have all the data that's just like close to me, so I don't have to go to like, the root server, however you architect it. But sure, like local first isn't a solution to social networks. In that regard, you have to come up with some hybrid or something more clever. But at that scale, you probably have really smart engineers to come up with amazing hybrid solutions anyway. So.
It seems that the ecosystem is actually sort of moving away from local first with the advent of like Next.js and React server components and stuff, where you're not even sending any JavaScript to the client to make the client interactive, at least not for React Native, obviously, but for the typical web. I'm wondering how you would go about advocating for local first in an organization where ecosystem where the default seems to be Next.js and the default of Next.js is React server components.
Yeah, I think there's a web argument to be made there, but I'm going to take it from the mobile kind of standpoint or angle and say that you're still right, meaning that even server rendering is coming to mobile, right? And this is something that I think a lot of teams have wanted for a long time. So back when I worked at YouTube, we were building a framework, like a UI framework, so that we weren't using like React Native or anything like that. We had our own internal stuff, but we were building this framework so that the server could tell the front end kind of what to render. In some ways, that's what we already have with HTML and the web. So we were kind of like going in the direction you're describing. And the reason we were doing that is because just the life cycle of pushing a new mobile app through like review and QA and getting it out there, it just is so long, especially at larger companies, that like when some event was coming up, like the Super Bowl or an election or whatever, we wanted to push new special UI to show users when they first open the YouTube app or something. We needed a way to more quickly kind of get that UI from the server to the client. So we kind of were rolling our own server-driven UI. And so to bring that back to your question, which is that Next.js has been pushing, and React Server Components has been pushing kind of server-rendered UI for a while, which ironically already had on the web, but like they're doing it in a very specific React-y way. And then on mobile, where we haven't typically had it, it's starting to come into React Native now, right? Where we're starting to get React Server Components. I think it's in beta right now for Expo and React Native. And so I think at the end of the day, the answer is like, treat that UI that's like, if you're telling the mobile app to render some UI, treat that like data and store a copy of it, just like you would with any other data in local first, and then render it when you need, so that if it's offline, it works just as well. But when you're online, you have the latest UI. I don't know, does that kind of address what you're asking?
Yeah, I suppose that Next.js like abstracts so much of it from you that it's probably hard to hook into it, and maybe it's not hard. I don't know. I haven't tried to do it.
No, I mean, you're probably right. Like if they haven't embraced that paradigm, if you're using a framework, you're kind of tied to the decisions they've made, and if they haven't embraced some local first paradigm, then you might be stuck. You may not be able to use local first in that situation, right? I think from the mobile side, we might have more to work with because we're not using Next.js, right? Yeah. Sorry, I got too many.
Just on that one, I think when I think of like Next.js and like server rendered UI, like I think it's more trying to address the problem of like if you're a traditional JS framework, you're having 2 round trips between the client and the server just to render the content on the page. So you're first sending over this big JS bundle, the application, then the application's like, cool, now give me the data for my application. So you're making like 2 round trips, whereas something like Next.js, it's just the application and the content, the data,
right,
is just computed in the same place on the server. So you're avoiding like
3 round trips. HTML and JavaScript.
Yeah. But so like for your argument of like how you might pitch it to companies, like what if someone has like a poor internet connection? Would you rather them just like sit around with like spinners all day, or have like some content there?
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I'll just add my 2 cents, which is just that like, turns out that there isn't going to be a really hard line where you're going to do you need the same treatment for every parts of your app, right? People often have a marketing site that is entirely server rendered or like as fast as possible, and then they have an application site where once somebody's logged in, actually like you need to do a whole bunch of like handshakes before you even show them data. And where am I going with this? Like there's a spectrum of interactivity that you might think about in your app, and that goes from like server rendered. I never expect this to change. The user gets it once and they like maybe cache it in their browser forever, right? This is like stuff that is just, like marketing content that, is rarely changing. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have like a collaborative text editor, right? That's never gonna be server rendered. That's always gonna be local. And like the end of the spectrum now is not just like in your client in memory. It's like with local first, it's like, oh, it's actually, a native feeling app that has local persistence, that has like a local data store that it can operate against. And so, it's not like you're all in one camp or all in the other. You use server, you do like, server components for certain things. And then you do server rendering for pages that really matter in certain applications. And then you have like really heavy client side, JS bundles that come down for really, like nuanced client heavy things like text editing and otherwise. And to see it as a spectrum, and also to see like, local first as like islands of interactivity, right? Like your whole site doesn't need to be local first, right? Like for like the social network, right? You don't need to download everyone else's feed. But when you're sitting on the plane and you have a random idea, the drafts like that you have for, your social network, I should be able to edit my drafts, right? And when I come back online, that should still be there, and it shouldn't clobber drafts that I wrote another time, right? So like, thinking about these as like, as units and on a spectrum, and that like, it's actually really great that now we get to pick and choose between the technologies, and it's not like, oh, like shoot, now Next.js has server components, so I guess we can't interact on the client anymore. No, it's like, I wouldn't rule out the utility of server components even in the world of local first and vice versa.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Right tool for the job. Yeah.
Do you still have a question?
Cool. I know, I was just, well, kind of. I mean, I don't know, I was just kind of wondering if you had options for peer-to-peer. I realize in your conference example, you're just scanning QR codes, but like, I don't know, what else do you think about that?
Peer-to-peer is really tricky. And what I've learned about the protocols that we have available to us is that all of them are they're unreliable enough that we end up having to fall back to like, traditional models. So like WebRTC is a great example. Like you can, in theory, like set up like, I forget what's called, like a turn server and do all these things so that like one computer talks directly to another over the local LAN or whatever. But like for numerous reasons that can fail. And so you just end up going to a server, like having a server as a proxy or a broker model. I've seen that in voice and video and screen sharing and
It's kind of the way the internet is designed right now, isn't it?
right. So there's maybe not a great way to do that peer-to-peer. Like maybe it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So like, are you just trying to run less traffic through the server? Are you just trying to make it a better experience for the user, or like, kind of, yeah, maybe start with like, what's the outcome that we want to solve, and then kind of go backwards from there and be like, is peer-to-peer, maybe that's a progressive enhancement, right? Maybe you can do peer-to-peer when it's available kind of thing, right?
I mean, I don't know, I'd imagine you can make a website that does like, the server does some matchmaking, and then after that, you're just, you are now the definitive owner of the data.
Yeah. All right,
I
I think I'm out of time. It's been a long time on Q&A. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. I've been inspired by the conflict merge, like the peaceful, conflict-free CRDT merging. And I'm wondering if like naming is hard. Maybe we're all kind of like talking about like local always. Maybe that's like a merging of these concepts of like you always have a local interactable experience, but it's not necessarily first or last. I don't know. Anyway, it's getting late. I'm getting very philosophical. That was loud. Sorry about that. We're gonna cut it now. What time do we need to get out of here? Like
8:30.
Hey, okay. We're gonna probably find like a local bar of some kind after if you want to come grab a beer, chat more. But please, like, use the time that we have left. Probably not have these like that. Sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. Mingle, ask questions. Convex folks are here. Clerk folks are here. Simon's here. Other people are here.
He's here.
It's here. Yeah, thank you all for coming out. And thank you again to Simon and to Ian and to Convex and to Clerk. Thank you all.